All right, we are recording.
So you want me to just jump in then?
Absolutely. Welcome. Hello.
All right. Um, I have no idea what you are all told about this morning. So, since we are a small group, I like to begin simply by asking what questions you bring or a statement of why you came this morning. Either way will help guide the conversation. Since there is a small group, we should be able to talk about the specific topics that you would like to talk about. So if you are inclined, and I hope you all are since we are a small group, um, either a question that you bring or a statement of why you're here this morning, because, we all have things to do on a Saturday and you could have made different choices. So why this choice or what question do you bring? And just raise your hand and I'll call on you. And if your name is wrong on your Zoom, then I'm going to call you by the wrong name. So, Bonnie.
I really want to know how to talk about mental health in a way that is not damaging to anyone who might be listening. I recently had a conversation with somebody who just referred to someone's issue as a health issue. And it occurred to me, yeah, maybe we should just refer to it as a health issue. And there must be other things we need to talk about.
Okay. So, safe talk about mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Katie?
I'll go. Hello. Lots of reasons. One being that I know many people, not many, a few people who have mental health issues anyway and have had serious episodes since pandemic started, just as a function of, I think, being isolated quite a bit, being away from their normal patterns and things like that. And so I generally think it's an important thing for us to be aware of, especially as we go forward, hopefully from the pandemic, one of these days, to be able to be aware of that as a church and as a community, and know that people will have been going through things that are pretty serious without very much support in some
Right.
cases.
True enough. I'll also add that if you are shy or don't have a camera, you are welcome to put your response to my questions in the chat if that is easier or more comfortable for you. But I know church people generally aren't all that shy, so someone else must have. Yvette?
I just finding ways, working from home. While it's great, the dogs love it. Don't have to have the drive, but it's stressful. I have found that I am a different person. When I look in the mirror, I don't like myself because I'm just irritable. Because I feel that there's no end in sight. Am I going to be at a computer screen? Work levels are double because they're taking advantage of us working from home. And I try to find ways, like on a Wednesday night, to get away to Vespers for Katie's thing, get away for choir. But when only running errands on a weekend, I should be able to do that sometime during the week. So just trying to find different ways, whether it's, like walking around, not today, but, run around the outside and finding different ways to get me back to me.
I hear that. You are not alone in that struggle. Oh, somebody else has a cat. That's good.
So I'll go ahead. My video's turned off because I'm using my husband's computer, which doesn't have a camera. But I'm here today because I do have a strong family history of mental illness, whether it's, bipolar, depression, anxiety. I myself, have always struggled with depression. It's usually manageable, but I've learned throughout this pandemic that I also have underlying anxiety. And working in the hospital, our patient load doubled, and I was taking care of patients that I felt were not appropriate for my level of education and licensing. And it was just becoming really overwhelming. So I am currently, getting treatment to help me be able to go back to work. At the same time, make it known that as an LPN, I should not be taking care of patients that are waiting for an ICU bed to open up. The RN needs to be able to take on that responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Anyone else? There's no wrong answer to this. There's no bad reason for coming. There's however you are is.
I'll go ahead. This is Sally. I'm not shy. I'm just moving around a lot, so you don't need to see all that.
Thank you. We don't need to get dizzy. We appreciate your.
Right. I just have a sense that there are people out there who everyone thinks are fine, and they're not. And I'm not sure how to identify them, or maybe just not even identify them, but just reach out to them in some way, because a lot of times the people who are doing everything for everyone, other people see as being, well, look at her, she can just go and takes care of everyone and maybe isn't taking care of herself.
Yeah, no one's fine right now, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, no one is fine. Some of us can be seemingly more fine, but on the scale of completely non-functional to completely functional, no one's completely functional right now. It's just not possible.
Of the kids, high school kids maybe who are so busy. I mean, in normal times, so busy and star athlete and star student, and then they killed themselves, and people go, gosh, we never knew.
Yeah, it's when I do suicide prevention training, I add in the superstars, like check in with the superstars, children, youth, adults, it doesn't matter. The ones who are over functioning, who seem to have it all together and can do all things. Nobody's life is that good, especially as teens, because we, as teenagers, our frontal lobes aren't fully formed. We don't have a lot of life experience. So if you have an over-functioning teenager, you have a teenager that's compensating for something. So we can talk more about that. I just want to check in. Is there any other specific topic you want to make sure that we at least touch on over the next hour and 15 minutes or so? You're just along for the ride. Well, buckle your seatbelts because we're going to be off and running. I should say a little bit about myself so you know that I do have some reason to be talking about what I'm talking about here. So I have been in ministry for my entire adult life. I took my first job in a church at 19 and I was ordained at 25. And I will soon be 54. So I'm not kidding when I say I've been in ministry my entire adult life. I have also been a pastoral psychotherapist, fancy word for a master's level counselor. And I have worked at a state psychiatric hospital. That was for 6 years. I am currently serving a church in Minneapolis, and we have a dedicated mental health ministry that they had prior to my coming, which is one of the reasons I arrived. I didn't have to explain how my years as a psychiatric chaplain would be beneficial in ministry. They kind of got that already, so that was good. I also served for 11 years on the United Church of Christ Mental Health Network, and I think 4 of those were as vice chair. And once we became sort of an independent LLC and had bylaws, I had to take a mandatory year off, which is why I'm not currently serving on the board. So that's just a little bit to give you some idea of the background that I bring to this conversation. My last book is The Lifesaving Church, Suicide Prevention for Faith Communities. That is my field of expertise within the wider field of mental health. And that's often where my energies are focused. But I want to start today with talking about what mental illness is and what it is not, because that will help us when we think about how to safely talk about mental illness and respectfully talk about mental illness. Words we use and words we ought not to use. So since we are a small group and I'm not a big fan of lecturing at you for an hour, I'm going to ask some questions, and I hope that you will answer either verbally or in the chat. When you think about mental illness, and this is no judgment, so when you hear the word mental illness, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And remember, you can use that space bar to hold down while you're talking, so you don't have to fish around for the take yourself off mute.
Suicide.
Suicide. Very often, mental illness can lead to suicide, particularly if it's untreated or undertreated. Neurotransmitters. Yes. Neurotransmitters can certainly. Depression. What else do you have when you think about mental illness? What causes mental illness? Again, don't worry about whether your answer is right or wrong. Some of the ways that we get at the myths about mental illness is saying out loud what we've seen or heard. Okay, so in chat we have, for causes of mental illness, cycles in family, unseen pain, isolation, probably lots of different things, genetics, environment, trauma, brain chemicals. Good. All of these things have some truth in them. We know there is a genetic component to mental illness. And by genetic component, I mean that you can, what I often saw is that people who have bipolar disorder would have a child on the autism spectrum. Or someone who is diagnosed as a young adult with bipolar disorder might have an uncle who has schizophrenia. So there's a genetic component in there that perhaps geneticists and folks like that understand better than I do. But what we know is there is a genetic link. That does not mean that everyone who has a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle with a mental illness means that they will have one. The other thing is the cycles in family. Sometimes there can be a learned response to things. You know, I grew up in a family where my mother was untreated for depression, and she was also on the autism spectrum and an alcoholic. So kind of an interesting trifecta there that I don't recommend. Really, it's not a healthy way to raise children. But there were some things that were learned responses. Like my brother learned that, drinking was a good response to stress. I didn't like to be out of control, so drinking did not appeal to me. So there can be some learned behaviors in there that can lead to what appears to be a mental illness. And certainly trauma causes mental illness. All mental illness takes place in the brain. That's why we call it mental illness. And it is a health issue because it's in the brain, which means it's biological, right? It's biological. It can have spiritual components. It can have psychological components, but it is at heart biological. Even so-called acquired mental illnesses, ones that result from trauma, have long-term changes in the brain. So PET scans and things that you can do to scan people's brains while they're alive, because it used to be we could only look at brains after people died, but now we have technology. We can look at people's brain and brain activity while they're alive. That we know things like the shape of the brain in certain areas is different for people who have depression as opposed to people who don't have depression. People who have eating disorders have a different shape to parts of their brain than people who don't have eating disorders. So, and people who have PTSD have, again, different changes in their brains that people who don't have PTSD don't have. So it is 100% in the brain. Why am I stressing that? Because the church has a very long history of dealing poorly with mental illness, and it's because we don't examine what we believe about mental illness. So with church, what have you heard, not in your own congregation, of course, but from friends who call themselves Christians, what have you heard about mental illness? Nothing? Your church has been silent? That's a different problem. Go ahead, Carrie. You're still on mute.
Sorry, my space bar decided not to work. I think in the Midwest, I grew up in South Dakota, and so I think that's kind of a Midwestern and national kind of stigma. You just don't talk about it. If there's something going on within the family,
right?
There's a shame associated with it. There's underlying guilt, and it's nobody's business at all, which is exactly 100% the wrong approach. But I think that's been the norm a lot.
And that's normative. You're right. That silence, that shame, that stigma is normative in churches because of long-held, unexamined beliefs. Jim just put in demon possession. That's one of them. Demon possession is one of those things that church has long said is what causes mental illness. Demon possession. What else have you heard that Christians have said, or the church used to believe that you don't believe? Anything like that. Demon possession is one. What else have you heard? Not praying hard enough. Yes, that's my favorite, because that blames the victim. So if God doesn't answer your prayer for healing and wellness, you have not prayed hard enough. That is a pervasive one, even in progressive Protestant circles. You're depressed. Surely if you pray more and try harder, you'll be made well. Right, because that works. That works for cardiac disease and cancer and diabetes, doesn't it? Oh yeah, God never gives us more than we can handle. That's another one of my favorites, which is pure baloney. Yeah. No, God doesn't give us these things. Payback for bad behavior. Yes, punishment for sin is another popular theory. If you have a mental illness, it's because God is punishing you. Kind of goes back to that verse that story in the Gospel of John about the blind man who sinned, this man or his parents, right? We still hang on to that. The number one question after somebody is diagnosed with a mental illness, sometimes even biological illnesses, or physiological illnesses, what did I do to deserve this? Right. The answer is nothing. It's what I call the puritanical preset. It's archaic theology that is sort of out there in the milieu that we live by until we look at it and examine it and say, no, this is not what I believe, which is why I'm asking these questions. So mental illness is a 100% biological illness, no matter which one of the mental illnesses you've been diagnosed with. It's 100% biological. It takes place in the brain, which means it is not demon possession. It is not punishment for sin, and it is not a character flaw. None of those things. And so if we take it as a 100% biological illness, it means we ought not to be ashamed. There should be no shame or stigma around it because it's not something we do to ourselves. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, I want to be clinically depressed today, or I want to be so riddled with anxiety that I cannot function, or I want to have flashbacks to my childhood trauma, or I want to hear voices or see things that other people don't see. No one gets out of bed making that their goal for the day. So mental illness, like any other kind of illness, happens to us, happens in our bodies. And we should respond to it the same way we respond to anything else. A little over a year ago, I got a pacemaker. And nobody said it was anything I should be ashamed of because I'm too young to have a pacemaker. But I have some health conditions, and one of them affected my heart rate, causing bradycardia. I should have no more shame about that than someone living with depression or anxiety or autism or ADHD or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, any of the other things. But in our society, we make a distinction between physiological illnesses and mental illnesses. And even though many of us contribute to the ailments of our bodies, Yes, we know diabetics who eat far too much sugar. We know people who have heart disease who eat too many fatty foods and salty foods. People who have high blood pressure who don't change their diets. We do things to contribute to our physiological lack of health. And yet there's not a lot of shame around that. It's just kind of an accepted fact. This thing went wrong in your body. You do the best you can. We don't have that same thought about mental illness. We don't say something went wrong in your brain, you're doing the best you can. We get mad at people when they stop taking their medications. We get mad at people who won't seek treatment. We scratch our heads and wonder why when someone dies by suicide. We do all kinds of things except say this person is doing the best they can. I do want to say something about that medication issue. How many of you know someone who have a severe and persistent mental illness who frequently go off their meds? Yeah, it's a common phenomenon. And you want to say, why do you do that? Why do you stop taking meds? The number one reason is actually a symptom of mental illness, particularly related to bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and schizophrenia, is that it's something called anosognosia. And it literally means the inability to know. So a symptom of their mental illness is the inability to know that they have a mental illness. And so when you say you need meds, they think, no, you need meds. You're the one who's acting weird. I'm fine. So that's the largest reason why people go off for meds, because they don't really believe they need them. The second reason is if you have a symptom like mania, you know what mania is, right? You basically feel superhuman. You are impervious to all of the ills of society. You have a ton of energy. You are super creative. And of course, you have insight into how the world works and sometimes into the divine that no one else has. You feel really awesome when you have mania. It doesn't matter that the rest of the world sees your behaviors as entirely bizarre and inappropriate. For you, you feel super special. Possibly Robin Williams. Yeah, there's lots of theories out there that he suffered mania on occasion that wasn't necessarily drug-induced. Yes. So think about that. Once you've felt that way, how can you go back to so-called normal, where you have to wrestle with the aches and pains of daily living, both the psychological ones and the physical ones? So that's another reason people go off their meds. They don't feel good. And then the third reason is the side effects from some of these medications are ugly. You get tremors, you gain weight, your libido is low. I mean, so many unfortunate side effects, and some people choose their symptoms over side effects. And there's also that stigma piece. There's still an awful lot of stigma around mental illness, so people don't want to acknowledge that they're on meds. The reality of the situation is that 1 in 5 people in the United States is diagnosed with a mental illness every year. 1 in 5. Worldwide, it's 1 in 4. So I'm waiting for those stats to be updated for pandemic, because I think it's going to be 1 out of 2, if not 100%. Pandemic has, what I say is, it magnifies our weaknesses. So if you have a tendency toward anxiety, you have a greater tendency now. If you have a tendency toward depression, that tendency is magnified. I often say that, maybe our normal level of stress in life is, say, 30 to 40%. Most of us can function okay with a 30 to 40% stress level. Pandemic has boosted that to 80% or higher. So think about it. When another stressor comes in, you're very soon overwhelmed. And that's everyone. That's not just people who have prior mental health challenges. Does that make sense? So those of you who express concern that people are struggling more now and maybe not reaching out for help, That is accurate. However, we know more people are reaching out for help because there are not enough mental health providers right now. If you need a therapist, you often have to keep looking until you find somebody who's probably relatively new so that they don't have a waiting list. Most mental health counselors, master's level counselors, are full. And prior to pandemic, there were not enough psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse practitioners to meet the need. So there's even fewer now. So a lot of people turn to their primary care for treatment for their mental health issues, depression, anxiety, and the like. Primary care is okay for maintenance. Primary care is not always the best for the initial diagnosis and medication because this is not their field of expertise. And often with medications, it takes trials before you find the one that works for you. Kind of like blood pressure meds. If any of you have taken medication for blood pressure, maybe the first one or two didn't work the way they were supposed to because every body is actually a little bit different. And lots of these things are tested on men, so women's bodies respond differently. I could tell you a lot of stories about women who struggled some, but their symptoms were within what we call normal limits. They had mild depression or they had hypomania, just, a lot of energy, but not quite manic. And then around the age of menopause, something tripped in their bodies and they showed full-on symptoms of bipolar disorder, complete with hallucinations and other things. And that's just an example. Men have different biochemical changes in their body that are less dramatic than menopause, but that can still affect their mental health as well. So it's important that we learn. As a primary physician, depression was one of the most common chronic illnesses in our clinic. Yes, that I believe, Paul. It's the most common form of mental illness, depression and anxiety. Perhaps with pandemic, anxiety is a little bit higher. Even those of us who were not prone to anxiety prior to pandemic may have episodes of feeling anxious during pandemic because isolation is not good for the human spirit, right? Even those of us who are introverts can get a little tired of looking at our own four walls. And when you have people who have high vulnerability, who cannot really go out in the world, I'm one of those, it can be grating after months and months and months. And if someone lives alone, that adds to the likelihood of developing increased anxiety or increased depression or both. So check in on those folks, especially those who live alone. Or if you know somebody was having some relationship challenges prior to pandemic and they are enduring pandemic with that partner, you want to check in on them as well. You want to check in on parents of children of all ages who are living in their house. Because, did you spend 24 hours a day, 365 days a year with your children? No, you did not. And if you have young ones, it's a lot of energy to keep them from having complete meltdowns because children too need community. And if they're not in school, they are missing their friends. They are missing that social interaction, even if they are not able to give voice to what it is they're missing. And it makes them cranky, which then makes parents cranky. And if you have teenagers or preteens, they're moody little critters. And if you are with them 24 hours a day, you also become pretty moody. So check in on your parents. And if you are in a place where school is meeting in person or will meet in person, check in on your teachers. That is an incredibly high stress environment because there is not enough vaccine to go around. And we have some schools here that insist that they meet in person and only require 3 feet of distance. And the CDC is saying 6 to 10 feet. So we know 3 is inadequate. But, if kids don't go to school and you're a charter school, that means you don't get funding. And if your school's not open and a charter school up the road is open, parents going to pull the child and put them in another school that is meeting in person if that's the way they're inclined. But it's also stressful if you don't think your kids should be in school you don't really have a choice. You kind of have to send them. So there's a lot of stressors in pandemic time that we didn't have prior. And if you live with someone who is vulnerable and you are less vulnerable, there's anxiety there too, because you're afraid every time you walk out the door or bring something into the house, you could bring in the virus. And nobody wants to be responsible for passing it on to their spouse or loved one. Oh yeah, 2 children is not a matter of 1 + 1. No. No. 1 child, 2 children, 6 children. The more you have, the more stress you have. And that's true without pandemic. And I don't have kids. I'm just telling you what I've observed. It isn't, 2 is just as easy as 1. No, because your children are invariably very different from one another and require very different things from you as a parent. All right. So we're on board with no one is safe from mental illness, right? It knows no barriers, no gender barriers, no economic barriers, no ethnic barriers. It can grab hold of us at any time. You can have PTSD from a car accident. You can develop depression and anxiety at any point in your life if the circumstances are right. That also may mean that when the circumstances change, your symptoms will go away. There's no guarantee of that, though, because the brain gets good at doing what it does. Do you know what I mean when I say that? Yeah. I had an eating disorder when I was a kid. And even today, when I am ultra stressed, and it's been decades since I had an active eating disorder, but when stress gets high, I start thinking of ways I can lose weight. Just automatically. So when I catch myself thinking that, I realize, there's stress in my life I need to pay attention to. The brain gets really good at doing what it does. When those neural pathways are worn, they're worn in pretty well. You can create new ones, but that's more work and more intention than letting the brain follow the ones that it knows well. That's very simple neurobiology that someone else could probably explain a lot more detail, but that's the basics. So given that 1 in 5 adults, probably 1 in 4, perhaps even 1 in 3 at this point in time, is diagnosed with a mental health condition every year, that means everyone has either carried a diagnosis themselves or knows someone or several who have. Someone in your family, someone in your work environment, none of us have not had experience with mental health challenges, right? It's either us, someone we love, someone we work with, someone we know. And doesn't that make you wonder why the church isn't better at this? It goes back to that puritanical preset. So we need to spend some time challenging our own thoughts and behaviors when you're making a judgment about someone who's ill, mentally or physically. Take a breath and remind yourself that most humans in most circumstances do the very best they can. That does not mean their best is good enough or satisfactory. It just means it's the best they can do with what they've got in the moment. And church could make that moment a whole lot better by creating a more open and welcoming environment for people who are living with symptoms of mental illness, right? So how do we do that? Any thoughts? Y'all are from a wise congregation, so you should have some thoughts on how we do this, right? No thoughts? I'm not just going to lecture at you. Go ahead.
Just like what you said at the beginning, that to reach out, that if you know of someone that is living alone, don't assume that they're okay because they're an introvert. They may want to become an extrovert. There's a lot of the people at church that know of my history, that I tried to take my life 40 plus years ago. And back then it was taboo that my stepdad, you keep it quiet. You don't tell anyone. I have my son now that deals with mental illness. He recently took a trip and found out that there's genetics on both sides of his dad's family. And so just, really being there and to becoming an advocate for American suicide prevention, just, listening. But then, because it took years of therapy, thousands of dollars later to get me to a point where I'm okay with myself. But then there's, man, you throw a pandemic on top of stuff like we have right now, as you said, that we could revert to, anxiety. If you had that before, it's going to increase. If you had depression, it's going to increase. Past life experiences, that, not saying that I'm going to go out there and die by suicide, but, you really got to just watch those signs that, that do a video call, do a text, do an actual physical call, write a letter, that check in on people.
Yep. So contact with individuals is great. One of the greatest unmet spiritual needs of modern society, particularly in the United States, is the need for community. And Paul wrote in gatherings. Well, gatherings are a little rough right now. If you have a place where you can meet physically distanced, great. But have Zoom gatherings, Zoom or any other video platform. Google Meet has some bugs, but it's free. You don't have to have an account. You're good to go with Google Meet, or Facebook video chat works. I mean, there's lots of platforms now to be able to use to have as face-to-face as we can get, right? We can't always be in person, but gatherings is important. When it comes to congregational life, though, there are things to do that make it clear you are striving to be wise, welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged for persons with mental illness. Yes? One of those things is that very simple. Do you all have joys and concerns time on Sunday mornings? Or do you do pre-recorded or Zoom live? How are you worshiping these days?
We are currently on YouTube Live.
YouTube Live. So there is some allowance for people to put in their prayer requests. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I do a Wednesday night Vespers that we do prayer requests in that space.
Great. And people can name mental health stuff?
Yeah, I usually make an effort to name it in the prayers if other people don't, just because I do know.
Excellent.
We're struggling right now.
Yep. That is the easiest way to begin to get the congregation familiar with and comfortable with mental illness as a human condition, is to name it during the prayer times. That's the easiest thing. And then when the building is open again, to make sure that you may see if, NAMI needs a place to have a support group, things like that. Because you want to be able to use your space to benefit people who have mental health challenges. Do a book study together. You could do a book study before pandemic even ends. We have book studies over Zoom all the time at my church. I think there's 3 different book study groups right now. But have y'all read Blessed Are the Crazy by Sarah Lund? No, I highly recommend you start with that book as a congregation or anybody who's interested. It's very accessible. It's her very real experience of growing up with a father who was untreated for bipolar disorder. And she talks about ways in which the church was not particularly helpful. So, Blessed Are the Crazy. And she has a new book out, Blessed Union, which talks about mental health in marriage, that is just brand new off the presses. So new, in fact, that Tuesday night is the official book launch where a group of us are going to be talking about mental illness in marriage together with Sarah. And then my book, The Lifesaving Church. That is specifically more about suicide prevention, which is the great taboo of the church, right? We don't talk about suicide in church. We might get to a place where we're okay talking about mental health. But if someone says, please pray for me, I'm feeling suicidal, there's often a period of silence or shock, or you can hear that intake of breath because people don't know what to do. So I do want to spend some time talking a little bit about suicide intervention, prevention, and postvention. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah. Suicide rates have continued to climb pretty much steadily over the last 30 years. longer, really, but particularly over the last 30 years. And the rate that by which suicides are increasing is always higher than the year before. So I'm wondering if you know which group of people is at the most risk for suicide. Well, I should rephrase that because we all know who's at the most risk: teens, right? But which group of people has the fastest increasing rate of suicide?
I learned this recently and I was fascinated. Isn't it like young middle-aged white men?
It's men of retirement age, white men.
I was off by the age.
Yeah, a little bit. So it's white men of retirement age, which is interesting. But if you think about how we have socialized men in our country, it makes perfect sense, because men are socialized to believe that they are their job. And so when they start thinking about retirement, or they have to retire, or their company is encouraging them to retire, they suddenly have no strong sense of identity because everything has been poured into their work identity. So the risk for suicide, if you don't believe you have any identity at all or any purpose beyond your work, and your work is taken away from you, that increases your suicide risk. I say that women are not going to be far behind. Since my generation, women were encouraged to have the similar identity with their career. So much so that some of my friends put off having their children until they were in their 40s, which, God bless them. I cannot imagine chasing around a 10-year-old right now, but whatever works. So we won't see much of a gender difference if we don't change things very soon. So that's the shocker. We all know that teenagers have a high risk for suicide. Do you know why teenagers have a high risk for suicide? It is because their frontal lobe is not fully formed. So I often jokingly say that teenagers are brain damaged by nature. Impulse control is not there. And when you say to a teenager, "How was your day?" what do you get? You either get the basic "fine," or if something really good happened, it was the best day ever. Or if something less than good happened, it was the worst day ever. Teenagers sort of exemplify life in the moment. And if something horrible happens to them, they think they will be defined by it forever. So trauma, sexual assault, even a breakup with a significant other. We don't take adolescent love very seriously, but it's very serious to the adolescents who are in love. And they lack the life experience to realize that life gets better. And this is only the first time you will be brokenhearted. It is not likely to be the last. So they lack the internal resources, and they lack the impulse control. And it seems like suicide is the only way to end the pain, because let's be honest, suicide is about ending the pain, the psychological pain that I refer to as psych ache. Psych ache was a term coined by a suicidologist for the internal, the psychological and spiritual, he doesn't say spiritual, I do, the psychological and spiritual pain that does not seem to lessen. It can be triggered by trauma. It can be triggered by brain chemistry. It could be a reaction to depression. It could be a reaction to many things. It could be chronic illness. Anything can make you feel this unbearable psychological and spiritual pain that nothing seems to alleviate. And so as an adolescent, not knowing that there is more to life, that there will be other ways, more healthy ways to cope with this, suicide seems good. It's that drive to end the pain that leads anyone to suicide. It's not just adolescents. It's that unbearable pain that nothing seems to touch that will lead someone to die by suicide. So do you know what the risk factors for suicide are? We've named some. Do you know any others? No? Or you're just shy, you don't want to say the wrong thing? Chronic illness, yep. Chronic illness can do it either physical illness. Chronic pain has the same impact on the brain as chronic depression. So that untreated, undertreated, undiagnosed mental illness is one of the most significant risk factors. Trauma, family history of suicide, almost anything, if the circumstances are right, can be a risk factor. So on the flip side of risk factors, do you know what protective factors are for suicide? And you're pointing. Protective factors for suicide? Community support system, a place of feeling connected and belonging, seen, valued. Yes, community, support network, all of those things are significant protective factors. Destigmatize mental health care, yes, we would like that to be the case. That's why we talk about it, because the more we talk about it, the more we destigmatize it, the more likely is someone who is suffering from suicidal thoughts would come forward. Regular family gatherings, perhaps, unless your family is part of the problem. And I'm thinking of families where there's abuse, neglect, or an LGBTQ youth has come out and the family's not supportive. Yeah. Sometimes families are contributing factors, and sometimes they can be protective factors. Same is true with church, by the way. Studies have shown, not that we needed studies to show this, but conservative evangelical church contributes to the suicidal ideation of youth and young adults. Somebody did a study on this of college-age youth and young adults. I'm like, we didn't need a study to confirm that, but now it's been documented. So a community that affirms who you are, no matter who you are, no matter how you live your life, can be a strong protective factor. A community that does not affirm who you are, and you hear things like you're a sinner, or you're an abomination, or you're going to hell, or you need to pray harder, those contribute to suicidality. So do you know what the warning signs are that someone has gone from having a risk for suicide to being suicidal? Giving things away, yes. Particularly prized possessions, yes. That is real.
Just change in behavior, that if they were really silent and now they're outgoing, whichever the opposite is.
Yep. And Paul has written suicide clustering, yes, particularly with adolescents. Contagion is a high risk for adolescents. Y'all remember when 13 Reasons Why came out? And I don't know if you watched it, but they had a very graphic suicide scene. And after that first season came out, there was a bump in adolescent suicides. There was another bump in adolescent suicides the summer when Kate Spade and the celebrity chef, whose name I don't recall at this moment, died. There was a bump in suicides after that, because both the celebrity suicides and 13 Reasons Why broke one of the number one rules for preventing contagion. Anthony Bourdain, yes, thank you. And that is, you never disclose the means of suicide. So, and think about that. If you are talking to someone who is suicidal and you don't know it, and you're talking about the means by which someone died by suicide, you have just confirmed for them a lethal means. Whereas they might have been thinking about ways that were less lethal, a little less potentially lethal. So when we talk about preventing contagion, which is that spread of suicide, that's one of the things we do, is that we do not disclose means ever. if you happen to be aware of the means by which someone died by suicide and you need to talk about it, go to a professional. Do not talk to your family and friends, because vicarious trauma is real. Find a professional who has the support systems to deal with whatever images you then put in their own heads. So I'll get back to more prevention of contagion in a minute, but I want to get back to risk factor or warning signs. So the basic warning signs are changes in mood. Someone has gone from being very depressed to suddenly very happy. Nothing in the world changes like that. Bipolar disorder does not look like that. Meds do not work that way. So if you're talking to someone in the evening and then you see them the next day and there is a radical change in their behavior, usually from depressed or sort of apathetic to very happy and content and outgoing when they had been depressed for a while, that's a warning sign that they very likely have decided to die by suicide. So mood, behavior, that giving away of things, change in sleeping patterns. They either sleep a lot more or a lot less. Substance use, either a lot more or a lot less. A sudden change in behavior. And then talk. So changes in mood, changes in behavior, changes in talk, meaning that they're talking about suicide. They're saying things like, the world would be better off without me. I only cause pain. Or they may say flat out, I want to kill myself. Those things need to be taken seriously. So changes in mood, talk, and behavior. Those are things to keep in mind if you're trying to decide if somebody is at more imminent risk of suicide. So if you think someone is suicidal, do you know what to do?
Just
Anybody?
keep talking to them, to be there, to listen.
Yes, one is to talk to them, yes, and to listen. More specifically, though, there are things that you can do. Talking and listening is never a bad thing. If you think someone is suicidal, the number one thing you do is ask them, point blank, are you thinking of suicide? Are you thinking of killing yourself? You can say, I've noticed these things. I've noticed you're sleeping a lot more. You're not coming to book club. You're not coming to Bible study. You're not coming to any of the things you used to come to. So I'm concerned that you're thinking of suicide. Are you? Don't ask them if they're thinking of harming themselves. That's an entirely different question. Because they could say, no, I'm not thinking about harming myself, and be completely honest, because they're thinking about dying. So ask the question directly. Yeah, Paul, you're right there. That's the next thing you're going to do. If you are not able to ask the question directly, if you're not comfortable, then you find someone who is. So then if the answer to the question is yes, I am thinking about suicide, the next thing you do is you ask, Paul's put it here in the chat, do you have a plan? You do not need to know what that plan is. You do not need that in your head. You simply need to know if they do have a plan. And if they are thinking of suicide and they do have a plan, you want to get them professional help. So if they have a therapist, can we call your therapist and get you an appointment today? If they don't have a therapist, you ask the next question. Do you know what the next question is? Do you have access to the means? Do you have access to whatever you need to carry out your plan? If the answer is yes, then you definitely need to get them to help. The best option is if there is a mental health crisis center in your locale, take them there. If not, the emergency room. If they will not go and you are convinced they will die by suicide if you leave them alone or hang up the phone or however this communication has taken place, then you do call 911. The caveat there is if you are calling 911 on a person of color, you need to have a white person there to bear witness, because police and people of color with mental illness do not mix well. That is an unfortunate statement about how things are in our society, but it's truthful. So the best option is if there's a mental health crisis center or a mental health crisis response team that you could call. If you think someone's suicidal and you don't know what to do you know that you can call the national hotline, the 1-800-823-TALK number? You can Google it. There's a text line as well. You can talk to them. You don't have to be suicidal to talk to them. You could talk to them about the person you're concerned about, and they will help you sort out what to do. So that is always a good resource. But you take all threats of suicide seriously. Unless you are a mental health care professional in a professional relationship with an individual, you take all threats of suicide seriously. Even if it's that person in Omaha, the good number is great. Thanks for sharing that. Even if you think the person is not likely to carry it through and they're trying to manipulate you, you still want to take it seriously because you are not the mental health provider for that person. And even those people will eventually die by suicide if they feel like their needs are not being met. So it feels manipulative sometimes, and it is, but those folks will carry through if they are not responded to appropriately. Because when someone says, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill myself, chances are that is a person in need of serious mental health intervention. Right? You know, their primary problem might not actually be suicidality, but it's something that needs attention and needs treatment. So, like I said, unless you're in a professional relationship with someone, you take all threats of suicide seriously. You ask the same questions. If it's someone that you know who struggles with suicidality, because there are people out there who live with chronic suicidality. Some days the thoughts of suicide are very prominent, and other days they recede. If it's someone you know who has a history of struggling, when you say, are you having thoughts of suicide? And they say yes, you can ask them if the thoughts are new or different. Is there something different about it this time? Again, that's only if you know that a person has a long history of struggling with thoughts of suicide. And you can ask them what has helped them in the past. People are often the best resource for help. What has helped you get through this in the past? But again, that's, you know, if you're not comfortable with that or don't know, you go through, you know, are you suicidal? Are you thinking of suicide? Do you have a plan? Do you have access to the means? If the answer to all three of those questions is yes, then the need for help is urgent and should be taken seriously. And you don't ask them what their plan is or what the means is. You don't need to know. You don't need that stuff living in your head. And who are you to assess whether something is potentially lethal or not? Because I've heard some interesting means of people wanting to die by suicide that I know full well will not necessarily kill them, but cause a fair amount of harm. But you don't need that in your head. Nobody needs to live with that kind of stuff. So we've just covered the basics of intervention. And talking about suicide, destigmatizing suicide, allowing people to ask for prayers if they are struggling with thoughts of suicide is one of the primary things that church can do, is removing that shame and stigma. You know, and that means if someone does die by suicide, you make sure you treat the family members the same way as if someone died of a heart attack or cancer. We often refer to mental illness as the non-casserole illness, meaning that people don't show up with, I'm in the Midwest now, hot dish. You know, they don't bring food and come and try to bring comfort. They tend to stay away, and suicide even more so. So we want to make sure that if there's someone in our midst who dies by suicide, the church responds in the same way, activating the meal chain, activating the prayer chain, making sure that people have what they need, help with the funeral planning, all of that stuff that you would do if the person died in any other way. Does that make sense? That's one of the...
That though is not so much the shame that may surround suicide or mental illness, but just being afraid to say the wrong thing.
Well, here's the funny part. Unless you tell them that, you know, they're a sinner and they're going to hell, there's no wrong thing to say, because people don't remember what you say. They only remember that you showed up. My best friend's stepson died by suicide several years ago. And I went to see him then. And neither one of us remember what I said. He remembers, though, that I drove for 6 hours to be there. That's the important thing, is that you show up and you bring food or useful things like paper towels and toilet paper that no one ever thinks of. You suddenly have all of these people throughout your house, and, you might have had toilet paper for your family for a week, but now you have people in and out of your house all the time. So if you want to be really helpful, bring paper goods. Seriously. People, and don't worry about saying the wrong thing, because what are you going to say? You're going to say, I'm so sorry for your loss. There's nothing wrong in saying that, because you are sorry. You are sorry that they are in pain. You are sorry their loved one died by suicide. You're sorry you don't know what to do right now. But showing up, being present, is more important than anything you could say. Do they have a dog that needs walking? Can I take your dog for a walk? Do they have kids, younger kids, who need a break from the heaviness? Can I take your kids to, well, it's pandemic. Can I take your kids anywhere? Non-pandemic times, offer to take younger children, if you are someone the family knows and trusts, out of the house for a while. What can I do to be helpful? Oftentimes they won't know, so offer what is comfortable for you. Do you need groceries? I can go to the grocery store for you. That kind of stuff. But mostly people just need you to show up, because by showing up, it means that you're not condemning them. Now, the problem with showing up for a suicide is you're going to get the question. And by the question, I mean, is suicide a sin, or is my loved one in hell? Because remember that puritanical preset that I talked about mental illness? That is part of how we think about suicide too, until we examine it. Now, good progressive Christians are going to say, I don't believe in hell. And of course, your loved one is with God now. There's a problem with that too. But let's start with the sort of go-to puritanical preset reaction, which is suicide is a sin and your loved one is in hell forever. So imagine you have just lost a loved one to suicide, and someone tells you that they are in hell forever. What are you likely to do in that moment, or in the next available moment? You're going to die by suicide so you can keep your loved one company in hell forever. Because you're vulnerable and you're in pain, and there is no greater pain on the planet than a parent who loses a child to suicide. I mean, suicide is painful no matter what, but there is no greater pain. So if you confirm for somebody their deepest fear that their loved one is in hell forever, in that moment of vulnerability, you have increased the likelihood that they will die by suicide. Now, if you are of the more progressive leaning type, we tend to want to say nothing can separate you from the love of God. Yes, your loved one is in heaven with God. They are at peace. All things are good. They don't know pain anymore. You are saying that to someone who is grieving the loss of a loved one to suicide. What are they likely to do? Sign me up. That sounds great. I would like to be pain-free also. There are similar issues when you're talking to a person who is suicidal themselves. I can't tell you how many times people have said to me over the years, I would die by suicide, but I don't want to go to hell. I say good. Right? I'm not going to talk about this deep theological issue. I'm going to say, okay, you don't want to go to hell, so you're not going to die by suicide. How can we deal with this pain? What's a better way to deal with this pain that might be also more pleasing to God? Since you brought God into it, let's talk about that. And then I have had too many clergy over the years come to me and say, please tell me this is not my fault. And as soon as those words are out of their mouths, I know what's coming. Somebody came to them and told them they wanted to die by suicide but didn't want to go to hell, and they gave them the spiel about how nothing can separate you from the love of God in Christ Jesus, and that God will welcome them into heaven and they will be with God in heaven for all eternity. And within 24 hours, that person they were talking to is died. And they want me to say, not their fault. Well, it's not 100% your fault, but you removed the last protective factor. Remember, we talked about risk factors and protective factors. Sometimes religious belief, even what we don't agree with, is a healthy protective factor. Psychological crisis, psychiatric crisis is not the time to talk about theology, especially when it comes to life and death. So now you're thinking, what am I supposed to say? What can I say? I can't say they're going to hell. I can't say they're going to heaven. So what do I say? My answer to this is, how does God feel about suicide? God is not a fan, which I can say in all honesty. God would rather we do anything else than die by suicide, right? God gave us this life, and who are we to say it's not good enough, take it back? God would rather we do anything else to cope with the pain than die by suicide. Well, almost anything else. And I know that because, look at Scripture. Do you know how many times suicide is mentioned in the Bible? 7. Can you think of any of them? None? Usually people spit out Judas. Judas, because there's one account that Judas dies by suicide, and then there's an account in Acts, I think, where his intestines explode. I don't know, the suicide story sounds better than the intestines exploding, but so Judas is one of them. Saul is another. Saul's sword bearer is another. And there are some others you've never heard of unless you took biblical studies or actually went looking for it. Of those 7 times, how many times does it mention God's response? None. Not one. We have no idea how God responds to suicide. All of our theology around suicide is completely manufactured by human beings to keep people from dying by suicide. At least that's where you're going to go to hell. And of course, there is significant church history that endorses that. Up until fairly recently, the Catholic Church said that, if you died by suicide, you're going to go to hell. You can't be buried in consecrated ground. That is no longer true. They err on the side of mercy and pray for the souls of those who died by suicide, which is actually not a bad thing. To err on the side of mercy and to pray that God will have mercy, right? That's okay. That causes no harm. So when we're doing funerals or memorial service or celebration of lives or writing obituaries, want to name suicide as the cause of death as long as the family allows it. Never the means. Name it. Break the stigma, break the silence. Often you will see things when people are honest. Died by suicide after a long struggle with mental illness or depression or addiction or something like that. So to name it, never the means, and to talk about the person's life, the fullness of their life when we're talking about memorial services and things like that, and talk about how there is hope for, as long as there is breath, there is hope. Because you're talking to a room full of people for whom some of them are going to be vulnerable to contagion. So you don't want to promise eternal peace. You want to continue to pray that God will have mercy. But the hope lies with those who have breath. So if I will make the announcement, if you are someone who is struggling with thoughts of suicide today, as we are doing this celebration of life, I encourage you to speak with me after the service. If there's a written bulletin, put down the local and the national hotline numbers. There is help available. You do not have to suffer alone. In this space, we do talk about those things. So please come and talk, as part of the service. So it's not guesses. There's no guesses. And then the other part about when we talk about suicide, there's certain language we want to try to use and language we want to try to avoid. We want to avoid any language that implies judgment, which is most of the old language around suicide. Successful suicide, failed suicide attempt, completed suicide. Is there an incomplete suicide? No. These imply value judgments. And I can assure you, as someone who has been there, if someone has engaged in suicidal behavior and not died, the last thing they want to hear is failed suicide attempt, because their first thought is, I will show you next time. Next time, I will get it right. And if there is not enough intervention, there will be a next time. So any words that imply value judgment. So you talk about someone dying by suicide, or you can make it a verb, which I find very awkward, but people do it, suicided. So died by suicide, suicided. I say engaged in suicidal behavior rather than attempted suicide, because again, attempt shows that value judgment that we do not want to reinforce. We want people to fail. We want attempts not to be successful. But if you're a person who is suicidal, that feels like they are yet again a failure. So I try not to say anything that would reaffirm that fail versus succeed thoughts that are in someone who is suicidal. All right, let me see, where are we with time? All right, I want to make sure that I get to questions. I know that I threw a lot of information at you. Sometimes I take like 2 days to do this mental health suicide training. So I threw a lot of information at you in the last hour or so. Yes, questions? Jim?
Okay, we got muted and unmuted. I wanted to have you address the issue of confidentiality and prayer requests in the context of our corporate worship.
That's always a tricky one. And obviously, if it's the person themselves who's asking for prayers because they are suicidal, you're fine. There's no issue there because they have named it for themselves. If you're talking about someone asking for prayers for a loved one who is struggling with suicide, I don't have any problem with obviously the community knowing. I don't publish those things. I don't include it in anything that's been recorded to go online later. Every church kind of has to figure it out for themselves, but I encourage people to only use first names. If they use a name at all, use first names only, unless you have the express permission from that person. Because, the church is not bound by HIPAA. HIPAA applies to hospital settings and healthcare settings. The church isn't bound by it, but we do not want to bring more shame or discomfort to somebody unknowingly, or knowingly for that matter. So I encourage people to use first names only, unless they have the express permission from someone to share. I think it's perfectly fine for somebody to say, please pray for my child who's struggling with thoughts of suicide or hearing voices or has just been diagnosed with whatever. Just be mindful of where those prayer requests go once they're out in worship. Other questions?
I have a question. So I do work with our youth camp in the state quite a bit. Most of our counselors, all of our counselors and our directors and stuff are all volunteers. Directors are often pastor types or people who have worked in the church. Anyway, so one of the things that we have often struggled with is how we can best as a camp help young people and sometimes adults who come to counsel who are very clearly going through some things and having some things in their lives. We have a process, right? Like for abuse, but we don't have a specific process of what do you do when it becomes very clear that this person is going through things and we don't know because of HIPAA if they are medicated for the things, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of things that we don't know. And we talk a lot about it, like, well, if we know their pastor, we can call their pastor, but how, you know what I mean? So we just are very curious. We have discussed a lot as to how best to handle that kind of situation in in a camping setting that is already very heightened because they're away from their normal things and that kind of stuff.
And kids are emotional, and
and
camp brings out the emotions in children like nothing else I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Good, bad, and otherwise. Some of my friends for life I made at camp. It's just the way it goes.
And also, we have really good leaders who just seem to be very good at that, not necessarily on purpose, but like they seem to be able to be
sure.
Yeah,
because they're the empathetic type, and they wouldn't be in youth work if they didn't love kids, and that's just the way it goes. So that's always a difficult one to know where the line is. If they're at camp and they're medicated, somebody should know, right? The camp nurse, somebody ought to know, because somebody's giving them their meds. Because if they're a minor, they're not allowed to have their own meds on them. So that's one thing you could find out by, it's on their camp registration if their meds are sent. This is not a secret. If you suspect they're not medicated and you do not suspect abuse in the family, but there might be something going on, then you call the parents. You tell the kid, I really think, do your parents know that you struggle with this? Do your parents know that this is going on? And see what their reaction is. If a kid freaks out, you can't tell my parents. They're either being overly dramatic or there's a reason that it's not safe to tell their parents. But I'm a firm believer in, if it's a life-threatening situation or potentially life-threatening situation, you tell the parents, unless the parents are the cause of the problem. And at camp, you never know. Letting their pastor know, I don't see any particular problem with that. I would ask the kid, because not all pastors are good people. So again, have you talked to your pastor about this? And if they say yes, you say, great. Do you mind if I have a conversation with them? But parents are, for minors, they should be the first stop if you really think something is life-threatening. If it's something not life-threatening but concerning, then it's a judgment call. Chances are parents already know. Chances are pretty good they sent the kid to camp hoping it would help them out. If the kid is busy and engaged in his forming community, maybe they aren't going to be cutting or thinking about whatever they're thinking about, or maybe they'll eat when they're not eating at home, something. Parents have magical thinking about summer camp. But, chances are the parents already know something's up with their kid. Life-threatening or potentially life-threatening, talk to the parents, unless you don't think it's safe to do so, and then the pastor's a good backup. But it's a tough judgment call. Other questions?
Yeah, I have one. Are there ways for us as a church community to have, I don't want to call them support groups, but just...
Call them support groups.
Well, okay, support groups, but none, other than maybe the pastors, most
it shouldn't necessarily be the pastors, because most pastors are not trained in mental health.
Right. And most of us, the rest of us members, are not either. The concern that I have about such a group, but first of all, is what kind of format is it? How do you prevent somebody from treating it like a therapy session?
You need to have somebody who is a trained group facilitator. That's my guess. And that training isn't hard. You can get it through NAMI. I mean, there's places that will offer that training. The Mental Health Network has a guide for forming spiritual support groups. And that's on the Mental Health Network website. Alan Johnson has often given the workshop on that, and it's recorded. You could watch that. That might give some help and guidelines. If you don't want the responsibility, then you host a support group. You invite NAMI to use your building, much like we invite the AA, NA, GA groups to come into our buildings. Invite NAMI to use your building as a support group if there isn't anybody in the church who feels okay with doing that. The other thing is you could have a peer support group for caregivers of people with mental illness. And that's less likely to be used as a therapy group. It's more likely to be used as a, what have y'all done in this circumstance?
And then are there other ways? There were a few of us, some of whom are on this Zoom, have talked about this already, and trying to come up with some ideas of how we can, especially during the pandemic, how we can reach out to others via Zoom and have some kind of a, like you suggested, a book group, which I think is great. We should probably start with something like that.
Yeah, book groups are the easiest entree into the conversation. Because anybody who's going to come to a book group with a mental health topic has something going on in their lives, either themselves, their child, their spouse, their, somebody in their circle that they love and care about who's struggling with mental health issues. So they're coming because they want something, they need something. And talking about a book is safer and easier than talking about your own life. So usually with the Mental Health Network, we recommend starting with Sarah's book, Blessed Are the Crazy. That should be book number 1. And then my book, Lifesaving Church, is book number 2, just because it goes from the more general to the more specific topics of suicide. And then I'm sure we will add Sarah's second book, Blessed Union, to that, because it literally just came off the press this week. And that's a great book. She basically in the book tells stories of couples for whom mental health has been part of their marriage. And some of those marriages survived and some did not. But she tells sort of intimate stories about couples who are struggling with mental health as part of their marriage, which is not an uncommon scenario, as you know, especially these days.
Thanks.
Other questions? No, you got it all? Actually, right now you're just so overwhelmed you can't form a question? That's it, yeah. That can happen. So I will say that I'll put my email in chat. You can email me anytime. And this is my personal email, not church email, so you don't have to worry about anybody but me seeing it. If you have questions that you would either rather not ask or you have questions that come up later, feel free to email me. I usually respond to emails within 24 hours. Weekends might take a little bit longer. We do have a couple more minutes, so if there's any last minute questions.
If you have a minute, then here's a question. I just have definitely heard a lot of people directing other folks to the many mental health apps that are existing right now, like Talkspace and all that kind of stuff, with the idea that in a pandemic it's better than nothing, because I just was curious as to if you thought that was a direction to send people in a pandemic at this point, because most of the time I would say find a real person, but
I would still say find a real person, find a therapist who's doing telehealth, find a support group that's doing telehealth. In the meantime, until you can connect, it's not a replacement for, but a support, try some mental health apps. Because they are meant to be supplemental. They are not meant to be the only treatment. Especially for things like depression and anxiety, because you need a human on the other end who can determine whether or not meds might be beneficial for you and make the appropriate referral. Because there are very effective meds for depression and anxiety. people don't need to live with the level of depression and anxiety that is debilitating. For the vast majority of people out there, medication is effective. You get some weird people who, like, I'm allergic to every SSRI that's ever been invented. That was not a joy for when depression was a feature in my life. My wife has had an allergic reaction to every ADHD medication ever made. So there are those things, and there are some people for whom the meds don't work. But there's enough variation in psychiatric meds out there now that usually with trial and error, there is the potential that you'll find the right medication or the right combination of meds to alleviate your symptoms. And for those who develop more acute symptoms during pandemic, it is highly likely that when pandemic is over, they may not need those medications anymore. But that's something to talk about with your provider down the road. And there's the other thing is people think they shouldn't be on medications for life. Like, why? There's plenty of medications that people take for life. I take thyroid meds. I am never going to not take thyroid meds. People take blood pressure medication, cholesterol meds, insulin. I mean, a lot of people take medications for life and don't think twice about it. But somehow with psychiatric meds, we think I shouldn't be dependent on them. Why not? Your brain doesn't function the way it was designed to on its own. It needs a little help. That'd be like me saying, oh, you can take the pacemaker out now because my heart rate's normal. Doesn't work that way. Exactly. I mean, it sounds preposterous when I put it that way, but that's the way we often think about meds. I mean, we're all guilty of it. I mean, how many of us have not finished that 10-day prescription of penicillin? You know, I feel better. I don't need this anymore. Think about what you're thinking. Makes no sense. Got 2 minutes by my clock here, so time for one more question. All right. Well, you have my email, so you can email if questions come up. And if you're talking as a group at some point, and it would be beneficial for us to talk again, about a specific topic within mental health or a specific topic within suicide prevention, or you want to convince more people to come because they need to hear and be part of this conversation, I am open to that as well, especially via Zoom. I mean, I have to confess that I had recently moved to Minnesota when you had the first WISE conference in Omaha, and I was on the planning team, and they said to me, so have you publicized throughout Minnesota that we're having this in Omaha? And I'm like, no, why would I do that? And they're like, it's close by. And I'm like, no, it's not. Because I'm from the East Coast, to drive to Omaha would have been preposterous. Lo and behold, I did it myself. It only takes like 5.5 hours, but I didn't know that. I kind of knew in my head where the map was, but still there was that perception that it was thousands of miles away because I grew up with Omaha being thousands of miles away. So, but I know where it is now because I've driven there. I even went to the zoo while I was there. Also had the weirdest experiences I've ever had in a hotel there. I was going into the hotel after the WISE conference. It's a long day, so I was really tired. And there was a woman standing outside smoking, holding a monkey. And I'm like, I kept looking. I'm like, no, it's a baby. I'm just really tired. Nope, it was a monkey.
I have to tell you, that's actually not normal for here.
I assume so. I mean, most people don't go around holding monkeys and smoking. But I was just...
The zoo thing I would have questioned had you not gone to, mainly because somebody pointed out to me that, because we had a Ted Jennings from CTS come speak here a couple of years ago, and he's like, y'all are really, really intense about the zoo.
Yep, everybody kept telling me to go to the zoo. And, it was okay, but Minnesota has the most amazing zoo I've ever been to, and because it has a huge commitment to conservation and preservation. Oh, sure. So it has this it's like 3 times the size of the zoo in Omaha. So I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool, but it's really small.
I don't know that. Did you go to the right zoo?
I don't know.
No, they Omaha and San Diego are usually like neck and neck for being voted the best zoo in the world. We'll just go with the world. And I was like, it's because there's not a lot about in Nebraska that we can claim is the best in the world. Like, we don't have the best pizza. We don't have, but we do have the zoo that has a rainforest.
And yes, I went to that zoo because I went into the rainforest.
We feel very strongly about it as a result. I think it's also gotten bigger though since then. Like, we have elephants now, which is very cool, and we have a whole, anyway, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I'm a fan of good zoos, the zoos that the animals look content.
Look very happy. Yeah.
Yeah. But
thank you very much for chatting with us. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.
So that,
Yes.